Chronic adaptations to training. We are skipping through to chapter 15 at the moment, which starts at page 343. These, basically any training program, this is, what we're ultimately trying to do. We are trying to improve our body, and these are those lasting adaptations. So they're the ones that last a long time. They're not the short-term effects of training. So, we train to improve our body. We train to improve our speed, or our muscular size, or our fitness levels. And the chronic adaptations, like we said, they're the physiological. So physiological meaning relating to the body. They're the changes that occur as a result of this training. Okay, keeping in mind the training principles, it should be specific to the sport, and it also should take into account the athlete as well. So there's no point in, trying to train a sprinter with some sort of aerobic program, because number one, it's not specific to the sport, and number two, it's also not going to be specific to the goals of the athlete. So adaptation, the key term that you need to know, it's something that occurs as a result of training. It's a long-term response, hence the word chronic. We have chronic and acute adaptations, which we'll look at in a sec. And acute ones, they occur in the short term. They don't last, and that's not what we do it for. We don't train to have these short-term effects. We train to have the long-term effects. Like you can see our muscular friend over there, he's obviously been at it for a while. Maybe he's hit the juice as well. But the chronic adaptations, they're the ones that last, longer. Okay, they're the ones that we will see more. So different training methods will also result in different adaptations. So, this our bloke up in the top corner there, he's obviously been working on some sort of resistance program. So you can see that there has been an increase or hypertrophy of the muscles. Whereas our little animated person down the bottom, our cartoon, she is, more focused on the aerobic training. So she won't necessarily see the same sort of muscular hypertrophy and adaptations in that sense, but she will see differences in terms of her cardiorespiratory system. It should be noted that whilst different training methods will result in different adaptations, men and women, they both adapt and they respond in the same way. So, aerobic training, you are going to see improvements in oxygen uptake, the transport and utilization of oxygen, the fat breakdown as fuels, fatty acid oxidation, respiratory ATP production. You'll see an improvement in your anaerobic threshold, reduced carbohydrate use during submaximal exercise, so there'll be more of a reliance on your fats. You will see an increase in the use of blood glucose, which will assist in glycogen sparing, so glycogen coming from the muscles, and an increased capillarization, mitochondria density, and oxidative enzymes. So they're all the improvements that you will see in aerobic training. Some take longer than others. Your typical program for this sort of stuff, anywhere between 6 and 12 weeks. And then the aerobic training methods, which we've already looked at in the previous video, are just listed over on the side. So we've got continuous fartlek interval. So the interval being like your long and medium intervals. You've also got your circuit and flexibility training. So anaerobic training, you're going to see anaerobic enzymes and fuels increase. You're going to see glycolytic capacity increase, and you'll see improvements in the muscular level. Okay, so you can see the difference in the heart, the muscularity of the heart. If you look on page 343, I don't have the comparison for it for an aerobically trained, but you can see that the wall of the heart there, the muscular wall of the heart, has actually increased in thickness. If you go and look on page 343, basically what that means is you will have a much stronger, much forceful contraction, which will obviously increase the stroke volume, so the amount of blood that's ejected out with each beat. And I mean, the overall end result is there's more oxygenated blood flowing around the body. Again, anaerobic training methods here. So we've got plyometrics and ballistic stretching, your weights program or resistance, interval, short, intermediate, your circuit with a high work to rest ratio. So that will be, you'll be working for, let's say, 30, 40 seconds and resting for 20 or so, or maybe even less. And then you've also got your sprint training down the bottom here too. Okay, so anaerobic will tend to produce, results like an old photo of myself. I seem to, have lost a bit of that over the years, but never mind. I mean, the hair has still stayed the same. So yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at aerobic training first. We're going to pick on that. So first we'll check out the cardiovascular system. So we'll look at the adaptations that happen at a cardiovascular level, and then we'll look at respiratory, we'll look at muscular as well. So the training benefits, okay? It's going to result in changes to the structure and the function of the heart, the blood, the vessels, and that goes right down to the arteries, the veins, capillaries, and also the blood. And basically what's going to happen is your body is going to become more efficient at delivering oxygen to the working muscles when it's needed. So the first thing that you'll see is you will have an increase in the size of the heart, specifically the left ventricle. And if you look on page 345, and I can't remember what's on page 345, the graph, right? Yes, okay, so our graph down here, right? There's going to be an increase in the size of the left ventricle. So we have our untrained athlete. So you notice the size of his left ventricle here, okay? But then you've got our trained endurance athlete. You can see that there's a massive difference between the left ventricle here and the left ventricle here. So basically what that means is there's going to be an increase in stroke volume because the heart is able to fill up more. So you'll also have a decrease in your resting heart rate. Because the heart's more efficient. It doesn't have to work as hard to maintain that same cardiac output. So if we look at our graph over here, we have our untrained athlete, okay? And we have the left ventricle mass in grams of, let's say, what's that, about 175. Then you can see that there is a massive jump, basically 100 grams, in terms of endurance runners, cross-country skiers. Cyclists are a little bit less, but you can see that the size of the left ventricle does increase quite dramatically as a result of aerobic training. So ultimately, the end result will be a more efficient heart, which means you have a decrease in resting heart rate, and you'll also have an increase in stroke volume, okay? And the cardiac output will, it will increase as a result, but the heart doesn't have to work as hard to maintain it. So this is like take 2 or take 3, I can't remember, but it hasn't been working for some reason. The heart, because there's a decrease in heart rate, it means that there's basically longer for the blood to fill into that left ventricle, which is the diastole phase. So basically what's happening is this is your left ventricle here, and there's more time for the blood to fill into it. And when it contracts, the systole, it contracts more forcefully. And because the size of the heart, if you were to go back to your textbook and look at page 343, because I haven't included it for some reason, the person who's been doing the aerobic training, they'll have an enlarged left ventricle. So, effectively, this whole chamber of the heart here, or this chambers of the heart, becomes, oh, you can't see it with yellow. I thought you'd be doing all right. Maybe we'll have to do a combination. Becomes quite a lot bigger. All right. So let's see if we can get my little video to work. There we go. So when it contracts more forcefully, and then there's more blood ejected as a result. And the athletes will reach their steady state a lot sooner, and their recovery rates will be a lot quicker. The other advantage of the aerobic training is that cardiac output will increase, which means that it'll be able to remove more wastes from the system, and there is less reliance on the anaerobic systems and more on the aerobic glycolysis. Okay, time for a little challenge. What I want you to do is I want you to complete the practical activity, and once you've done that, I want you to compare your results with your classmates. Don't open the table prior to completing it, and don't cheat. Let's see. I want you to follow it. Lie down for 15 minutes. Obviously, if you can do it, before you get out of bed, do that. Find your pulse. Let's see who's got the lowest resting heart rate. All right, so there's the address down there, https://bit.ly/34dy capital A little z or z capital D. Fingers crossed that the link works. If it doesn't, let me know, but it would be interesting. So have a crack. So the blood vessels. Training sees an increase in the cross-sectional size, and if you look at my really awesome drawing over here on the right-hand side of the screen, cross-sectional size basically means the size, like if you were to cut it straight down and look at it through the blood vessel, that's what you would see. Okay, so there's an increase in the size of the arteries and the capillaries that feed the heart, and basically, in a nutshell, it just means that you're getting more blood through. Okay, training also results in an increase in the capillaries supplying blood to the working muscles, and this, you'll see this most with your slow twitch or your type 1 muscle fibers, because slow twitch, they're the ones that use the aerobic energy system. So you can see the difference between the trained and the untrained athletes, and the number of capillaries around the muscle fiber. So there's quite a big increase there as well. So another advantage of obviously having more capillaries is, we've talked about more O2 to the working muscles, but then there's also going to be more waste that gets removed at the same time. Continuing on with our blood vessels. So aerobic training will reduce the amount of low density lipoproteins. They're the bad, they're the plaque causing cholesterol. Wow, I should have even just looked at the thing instead of trying to go off my my memory. So that's the stuff that when it forms, that hard, crusty, sticky surface, it reduces the blood flow. And if part of that was to break off, then potentially heart attacks can result if it's in like coronary arteries and that sort of thing. So you'll also see an increase in the AVO2 difference. So remember, that was the amount of oxygen that gets extracted by the muscles. So you have your, if you look in our little diagram here on our right, we have the blood coming into the muscle from the artery. We've got our muscles here, and then we have the amount of blood that's leaving, okay, or the amount of oxygen that's leaving. So at rest, there is considerably more oxygen that is coming out, okay? So you might have an AVO2 difference of maybe 4 or 5 mils, okay, as opposed to at exercise where you might have an AVO2 difference of maybe 18 milliliters of blood per 100 mils, okay? So it just means that a trained athlete is going to be able to extract more from the blood. Can't move on. There we go. So the other changes that the athletes will notice as a result of aerobic training are also changes within the lactate inflection point. So remember, that's that point at which, and if we look at the graph here, it's the point at which there's that big jump in the amount of lactate that's being produced in the body, in the muscles. So that LIP, or lactate inflection point, it's that point, it's that threshold at which, you know, it just starts increasing exponentially. So advantages, you know, it means that obviously the athlete is able to work at a higher intensity and prevent crossing that, well, not really prevent, but delay crossing that threshold until much later on. So if we compare those two, you know, there's, let's say there's the LIP there for pre-training, okay, and then you don't see, whoa, that's terrible. You know, the threshold is crossed much later on with the actual post-training. So you can see that there's, you know, it's almost like a whole liter of oxygen that's being consumed, extra oxygen that's being consumed, that is preventing crossing that threshold quite as soon. So our blood, as a result of training, we get an increase in the total volume of blood. We get more red blood cells, and they are the ones that carry the oxygen around. Our plasma volume also increases, and it will just mean that our blood is able to flow much more smoothly, and it decreases the blood pressure. So you can see there a diagram that basically, you know, you've got 3.3 liters of blood plasma as opposed to 2.8. You only have a slight increase in the red blood cells, but it's still, that's, you know, 200 mils. And you also have a total increase in the amount of blood, which in the end means more blood, more oxygen, more to the working muscles. Question time. Complete the chapter check questions on page 351. Good luck. Moving on to the respiratory system. So we get increased lung capacity. So training will result in the increase of the VO2 max. Now, if you remember back to you know, the videos that we've watched in the past, VO2 max is the amount of oxygen that can be consumed and then utilized during that maximal exercise. Okay. Some of the other adaptations that you'll see, I'm not sure why I've put those there, because they belong with the cardio system, which we've just looked at. Never mind. Ignore them. Look, let's get rid of them. Wrong. They shouldn't be there. So if you see over with our graph, and my head's in the way, so I'm going to look at my other screen, comparing our males and our females, you can see the active young men like you, Jeremy. I'm not going to pick on Joel this time. active young men, maybe a VO2 max of 50 liters. Okay, and then it obviously it goes up the more you train. So the more aerobic training that you do, and the longer you do it for, you will see changes to your VO2 max. So national level long distance runners can have a VO2 max around that 70, 75. In the videos that we've watched, what was it there? I think there was 60, 67, 68 for a triathlete, something like that. Females, unfortunately, don't do quite as well in terms of VO2 max, and the reasons for that is they have the smaller frame, which means they have a smaller set of lungs, and ultimately that will impact on their VO2 max. So another change, another chronic adaptation is increased lung ventilation. So we know that there are effects from aerobic training in terms of like the cardio, the respiratory, and that sort of thing. So there's going to be changes within the structure of the respiratory system, which we've already started talking about. Basically, it improves the function of the respiratory system as well. Whilst it improves the heart function or the cardiovascular function and the muscular function, it also does the same sort of thing to the respiratory system. So whilst the tidal volume, which is a normal breath in and out, doesn't change, things like total lung capacity will change. You can see that there's a total of almost 8 liters of oxygen that can be, or air that can be breathed in, as opposed to about 6 liters. So there's changes to the total capacity. And as a result, the system, the respiratory system, and the respiratory frequency, it actually decreases because, and it's the same sort of thing with the heart, because the system has become more efficient, it doesn't have to work quite as hard to get the same levels of oxygen into the blood. Also, you'll find that pulmonary diffusion increases through the training. I lost my train of thought there. Pulmonary diffusion, it increases through training, and the reason behind it, or at least the thoughts behind it, is because of the structural changes that have happened within the lungs at that alveoli and capillary or alveolar capillary interface. So if we draw a very crude picture, you've got your little air sacs here. They're meant to be bubble-like, but because I can't draw it to save myself on the computer, so there's the alveoli, and then you've got your capillaries and basically the blood flow that's flowing past here, and the exchange of your carbon dioxide and your oxygen within there. It's thought, because of the structural changes to the lungs, that there's greater diffusion, there's more surface area, and then obviously because there's more surface area, there's more sites where the diffusion can occur. And that is a disgraceful drawing, and I'm going to get rid of it. Gone. So yeah, increased lung ventilation. So here we go, muscular adaptations. So we've looked at the cardio, we've looked at the respiratory. Now we're looking at the muscular adaptations. So these are the ones that you probably tend to see most with anaerobic training. You will still see some adaptations at the aerobic level too. So the most effective way to bring about any improvement is through continuous training or high repetition resistance training, so weight training. And as a result, you're going to see structure changes to the muscle. You'll see increased oxygen utilization, so there'll be an increase in mitochondria, there'll be an increase in myoglobin, which we'll look at in a bit, and there'll also be an increase of oxidation fats and glucose. That should have been. So let's look at the muscle structure changes. So, excuse me, your muscles contain a mix of fibers. Okay, they contain and dependent on the person, they may contain your slow twitch, which are your aerobic fibers, so the dark red colors here. Okay, that's if you're a long distance runner or an endurance athlete. Someone who's, kind of good at both will have a 50-50 split of both. And then finally, your sprinters will have predominantly more white fibers or fast twitch fibers. So due to the activity that we're doing, we're looking at aerobic training. Preferentially, the body's going to recruit most of those slow twitch fibers first. Okay, so the aerobic training is going to improve the aerobic capacity of those slow twitch fibers. The fast twitch fibers are going to improve. They're not going to turn into, slow twitch fibers. There are the fast twitch fibers that will take on some of the more aerobic characteristics, but they're not going to change into slow twitch fibers. Basically, what will happen is the fast twitch fibers will improve their aerobic capacity, but it will only be, so much. Okay, the slow twitch fibers are going to show the greatest improvements during the aerobic training. Slow twitch fibers are going to be the ones that are also going to increase in size. So getting back to that hypertrophy term, so the size increased is probably, or is thought to be, from the increased capillarization at that fiber level. So there's going to be more capillaries surrounding the muscle and the muscle fibers, so there's going to be more O2 to the working muscles, which is obviously what we want to see. We're going to see an increase in mitochondria. So mitochondria are the powerhouses. They're the things that in the aerobic energy system, they're the ones that produce the ATP. So obviously the more mitochondria, the bigger the mitochondria that you have in the body, the more ATP they're going to be able to produce, the better the performance will be when you're working aerobically. More myoglobin. So myoglobin is the molecule that helps deliver the oxygen across the cell membrane. So across this little area here. Okay, so more myoglobin means that you're going to have more oxygen available during that aerobic respiration. Increase in your muscular fuel stores. So we know that during rest and during submaximal activity, the body prefers to break down the carbohydrates because it's easier. But if we can spare those carbohydrates till later on when the intensity increases and we need that oxygen to, break down the carbohydrates rather than trying to break down the fats, that is obviously going to be better. But the aerobic training anyway, it changes the way the way it metabolizes the fats. It basically, it's able to oxidize them and use them a lot more easily. There's an increase in the enzymes that are required to break these down, so the body is able to use fats much more easily. So if you look at our three graphs here, we've got our energy from carbohydrates, and we've got our exercise in duration, so 30, 60, 90, 120. You can see that there's a difference between the trained and untrained, and there's less reliance on carbohydrates in an endurance trained athlete as the session progresses or as the exercise progresses, compared to the untrained athlete who is going to be using more and more carbohydrates because there isn't enough oxygen available to break down because they're working so hard. Whereas on the flip side, you're going to see more and more reliance on the fats at submaximal activity, and less on the carbohydrates. And then finally, you will actually see that they are very similar there. You'll also find that there's a decrease in the utilization of the anaerobic glycolysis system. I was just too lazy to write anaerobic glycolysis. So that's linked to the oxidation of fats. Muscles can oxidize fats, then there's less reliance on the anaerobic glycolysis system, and you're able to work at higher intensities for longer, so you can push that lip further across. Did I scare you? More questions. Chapter check questions on page 357. Just do questions 1 to 4. Don't worry about doing question 5. Good luck. All right, we've done the aerobic adaptations. Now let's look at the anaerobic adaptations. So we're looking at that, 85% of max heart rate. That's this zone here. Okay, before we were looking down here, now we're looking up here. So what do we have? They're mostly seen at the tissue and muscular level. Okay, they're best developed through sprint, short intervals, plyometrics, resistance, all those power sort of things. Okay, but if we look at the graph, and my head is in the way at the moment, you can see that with the anaerobic training, there is an increase in ventricle thickness. So the graph on do you know what? No, actually, it just says it anyway. So you can tell the anaerobic athletes versus the endurance athletes. So this one here, we have our endurance athlete. Sorry, our non-endurance athlete. This is our sprinter. Okay. You can see that there's been an increase in the ventricle thickness, so the thickness of the wall. It's not going to change the stroke volume, but it means that the blood is going to be ejected more forcefully. And then if we look at this graph over here, we have, that is a terrible straight line, and that is an even worse arrow. We have the size of the ventricle for our endurance athlete, and you can see that there is a big difference in the size of the cavity, which means that the stroke volume is going to increase. Muscular adaptations to training. So you're going to see hypertrophy. You're going to see enlargement in the muscle fibers, particularly in the 2B ones. So they're the ones that are the white fibers. It's going to be more pronounced in males than females, because the males have much more testosterone, and testosterone is associated with muscular growth. The hypertrophy occurs because the number of filaments and the size of those, basically, they increase. You'll get increased ATP and PC stores because of the hypertrophy. There's increased stores within the muscles. So in terms of what that means for the energy system is you're going to have more ATP. You're going to have a bigger capacity. There'll be more energy able to be released. You'll have faster restoration, and the people who are most likely to benefit from that are going to be your sprinters and your power events. So in the muscles, there's also going to be an increase to store glycogen. So bigger muscles, bigger stores, and it's going to be of benefit to the athletes that use the anaerobic glycolysis system. So your 400 meter runners, your 800 meter runners, those sort of people. It's going to be able to produce more energy at that level. Then we come to some neural adaptations. So you can see there's an increase in the neural recruitment patterns, there's an increase in the firing rates, the motor unit synchronization, and then there's a decrease in Golgi tendon organs. So what does all that mean? So basically, in terms of the neural recruitment patterns, it means that more fast twitch fibers are going to be recruited, which means there will be a much more forceful, much more powerful contraction. The same with the firing rates. You can see over in our little picture here that there are much more signals for the muscle to contract, which again allows for more forceful, more powerful contractions. The motor unit synchronization allows for smoother acceleration, which means that there's greater power within those. And if you're looking for more information on any of this stuff, you will find it on page 361. So I'd recommend having a read of it anyway, because I'm going over it very, very quickly. But they have, like, if we look at this synchronization, it says that they have the ability to perform powerful movements with exceptional timing and little apparent effort. So it's because everything is working sequentially and working much smoother, then yes, there is going to be greater acceleration. There is going to be, because the timing is there, it's going to be much more powerful. Then finally, these Golgi tendon organs. At the end of the muscles, where it joins in the tendons, okay, I'm just using my wrist as an example, there are basically, let's call them sensors for lack of a better word, and their purpose is to prevent any sort of injury from happening from, too much of a muscular contraction. Okay, so the decrease in these organs allows for a much more forceful contraction. The final slide in the PowerPoint, what I want you to do is I want you to use chapter 15, so that goes all the way back to the start of page 343 and finishes at 365. I want you to create a summary table similar to what I have done in the past. It just says this increases and this decreases and so on and so forth. Just some quick and easy summary that you can refer back to. So I want you to use chapter 15, this video, create a summary table, and also complete the chapter review questions on page 365. And then I think we actually only have one chapter to go. It's only one chapter to go and we're done. Wow. See you soon.